Today, your school meals training presenters will be Allie Lampman. She's operating the Zoom and will also be presenting today. Myself, Erica Arter, and we also have Sean Von Drodchek. We've also linked the web address for Nutrition Services, where you can find important forms, resources, and a staff directory with all of our Nutrition Services program specialists. So you can reach out to any of us, and that's available on that website listed on the slide. Next slide. Just a few housekeeping items. Like yesterday, if you joined us yesterday, use the chat box to ask questions. We will not be answering those during the presentation to keep things moving and make sure we complete our presentation on time, but we will answer those at the end of the presentation, or you can unmute at the end of the presentation and ask your questions as well. But make sure to enter any of those questions you have in the chat box. We will get to all of them. The question and answers, like I said, will be at the end. You will be muted during the presentation, but we will unmute you at the end so that you can ask any of your questions. Next slide. The slide deck and handout packet have been emailed to you, and in that email, it was sent on July 24th from Allie Lampman. You should have received the Zoom link where you got the Zoom link in order to get onto this training. Also attached to that were the slides and handouts for yesterday and today's presentation. So today we will be on the part 2 handouts. Handouts will be reviewed in packet order. And the first handout for today in the training is the training certificate. For those of you in our audience who need this certificate for professional standards continuing education hours, you'll want to fill in your name. The location would be via Zoom, today's date, and the number of CEUs. Today's presentation will provide 3 hours of continuing education if you stay for the entire presentation. We use an honor system, so if you stay for the full presentation, you'll get the full continuing education hours. If you need to, jump off early or something like that, just record the amount of time that you were able to attend the training. And then make sure you retain your completed certificate on file with your other training documentation, as we will ask to see that during an administrative review. Next slide. A little bit more housekeeping. We do ask that you add your information to the Google Doc linked in the chat box. Include your name, school name, email, and phone number. So please try to make sure you fill out all of the lines in the Google Sheets. I see that Allie just posted it again in the chat box for signing in. If for some reason you are unable to get into the Google Sheet, I know we had a few people not able to do that yesterday. If you are unable to get into the Google Sheet, please list the information in the chat so that we can add it to the Google Sheet. So your name, school name, email, and phone number so we can get a hold of you if we need to. Next slide. After this training, you'll be able to complete production records and identify the documentation to support meal pattern requirements. You'll be able to identify a reimbursable meal and meal counting. So we'll go over signage, offer versus serve, and point of service meal counting. And then at the end of the presentation, we're going to go over other program requirements. So you'll have an understanding of the other program requirements that go along with the school lunch and breakfast programs. Also, at the end of the presentation, for those of you who do after school snack or special milk, we will be covering a few slides on those topics as well. Next slide. So if you joined us yesterday, the areas that we covered in part 1 of the Zoom training were the breakfast and lunch meal pattern requirements, the 5 food components: meat alternate, fruits, vegetables, grains, and milk, and how much of each of those are required to be served for breakfast and lunch. We went over grade group portion sizes. So the portion sizes required for those 5 food components for grades K through 5, 6 through 8, and 9 through 12. We went over the nutrient standards and the required manufacturer information that's required to be on file. We also talked about standardized recipes and HACCP yesterday. Next slide. So you've probably noticed that there's a lot of documentation required, and we talked about a lot of those areas yesterday. We talked about the menu, the manufacturer information, standardized recipes, food safety and HACCP records. Today, the first topic we're going to dive into is production records. So that's where you're going to record the food items to meet meal pattern, the portion sizes, and the quantity of food prepared and served. So we will be taking a deeper dive into production records as our first topic in today's training. Next slide. So like I said, our first topic here is going to be production records, and we will talk about those and how you'll use them in your food service operation. Next slide. Nutrition Services is required to conduct administrative reviews of the school meals program, and your production records are an important part of that review process. This is going to be your documentation that meal pattern has been met and the meals served are eligible for reimbursement. They are also an important tool for the school that can be used for forecasting production. Production records must be kept on site at the school as they are property of the school district. So if we come on site to do an administrative review or an unannounced visit, we would want you to be able to produce those production records. We won't want you to say, oh, those are, at my house, I need to go get them. They do need to be left on site at the school because they are the school's property. And then if you have no production records or incomplete production records, that can mean no reimbursement. And we do not want that to happen. We want you to have all the records that you need to prove that you're meeting meal pattern and receive the reimbursement for your meals. You know what we always say, if you've been to our trainings before, if it's not written down, it didn't happen. So even if we believe you that you have served an item or you had it that day, if it's not written down on your production record, we can't give you credit for it. Next slide. All foods, including condiments, must be recorded on a daily basis. So production records are required to be completed daily. A tip from a seasoned kitchen manager is don't leave, something blank thinking that you're going to come back and fill it in later, because likely you will not. We are all very busy, and we know that, people forget or you don't make it back to those production records. So they're daily production records, so don't save them up and take them home on the weekends to complete those daily as you complete meal service. Production records also demonstrate compliance with meal patterns, so they show us that you've served all the required components in the required portion sizes. They also document the amount of each food item prepared, how much you plan to sell, and the amount left over. And they are completed by each preparation kitchen. So if you have more than one site where food is prepared, each site is responsible for documenting their own production record. Next slide. Production records must document all information necessary to support the claiming of reimbursable meals. First and foremost, and very important, is that all menu items are listed and all required meal components are offered. So we want to see your menu for the day and that you've recorded all meal components on that production record. Second, we need to see that the milk, whole grain rich, and vegetable subgroup requirements have been met. And third, that the weekly quantity requirements for grains and meat alternate have also been met. Next slide. Production records also must document the time and temperature for those potentially hazardous foods, your product brand, number, or school recipe, or if it's a commodity item. This is important, especially if there is a food recall. You know what day you served that item, and if it was that particular product that is being recalled. Your production record also needs to document the amount of food prepared and how much was left over, as well as a la carte, adult, and other non-reimbursable meals, including the number and portions of each of these food items. Production records must also document condiments served as part of the meal. So I know that sounds like a lot. You're probably saying to yourself, is that all that we need to write down? But hopefully after we go over it today, it's not quite as daunting. And we'll go over some examples of how to complete these. Next slide. Like I said, these production records are your documentation that you have served a reimbursable meal and that those meals are eligible for reimbursement. If that documentation is not there, meals are not eligible for reimbursement if your production records are missing or if they are incomplete. So some examples of this would be if you're missing a meal component, if you didn't write down one of the 5 components. So if you didn't write down your meat alternate for the day or your grain for the day, fruit, vegetable, milk, if any of those are missing, those meals would not be eligible for reimbursement. If you're missing your vegetable subgroups, so maybe you didn't serve or write down that you served, let's say your bean, peas, and lentils subgroup for that week, then you would be missing a vegetable subgroup for that week, and those meals for that week may be ineligible for reimbursement. If you have inadequate quantities, so you didn't serve enough of a component in order to meet meal pattern. If the minimum quantity requirements are not met for grains and meat alternates, so for example, maybe you only served grades 9 through 12, 1 ounce of grains or 1 ounce of meat alternate, those meals would be incomplete and not eligible for reimbursement. And then not meeting the whole grain rich or milk variety requirements. So remember, at least 80% of your grains served for the week have to be whole grain rich, and you have to serve at least 2 varieties of milk, one of those being an unflavored option. So from your production records, we should be able to tell that as well. Next slide. With input from our administrative reviewers, some of the health inspectors and schools, our production records have been slightly updated for school year 24-25, and hopefully you'll find these changes new and improved. First, we've made all of the production records fillable PDFs. They are also available as Word versions. So if you want to type in them, if you're somebody who likes to use the computer and you want to pre-fill in information like your site name and your grades served, maybe some of the items that you have on a regular basis, that should be a little bit easier to do now with these fillable forms. If you are not a computer person and you want to just continue to write on your production records, that is completely fine. You can also do that just by printing these forms or making copies of them. So you don't have to fill them out on the computer if you don't want to, but we did make it hopefully easier if you do want to do that or pre-fill some information to be able to type in these forms. We've also added a place to mark or check if an item is whole grain rich. With that 80% flexibility where 80% of your items have to be whole grain rich for the week, we can't assume that all the items you're serving are whole grain rich or that they're not whole grain rich. So we do need to be able to identify that on the production record. In the past, we'd asked that you write WG or WGR, and we just found that that either wasn't being done or missing. So trying to make it easier, we made a column where you can mark that it's whole grain rich, 1, to remind you you need to do that, and 2, where you can just check a box without having to write out WG or WGR on your production record. We have added a column at the bottom of the production record for meal pattern contribution, as Sean was talking about yesterday when she went over labels and CN labels, and Allie talked about recipes. You need to know how the items that you are serving contribute to meal pattern. And if you don't, you need to get that documentation and record that so that you know that you are meeting meal pattern. There used to be a column kind of on the top right-hand side. We've moved that to the bottom, and you can now record your meal pattern contribution for all 5 food components on the bottom of the production record. We've updated the multi-day bar production record and the meal delivery ticket as well to include some information that was missing or some information requested from the health inspectors. Next slide. These production records are available on the NDE website. If you click under the school meals program and click on forms and resources, under the category of food service and nutrition, you can click, if you go down under that category, you'll click on production records, and that will bring up the production records. So you can see we have breakfast, lunch, additional breakfast and lunch forms, and after school snack. Both of those, all of those are available in both PDF and Word versions for you to download to your computer. Next slide. Schools and residential child care institutions are required to use the lunch and breakfast production record provided by NDE. You can also develop your own production record, or if you have a software system or something like that that you use for production records, that is also okay, but that does require approval by NDE each year when you submit your school meals application in the CMP system. So in the CMP system, there's a question that asks, do you use the NDE production records? And you mark yes or no. If you mark no, it will prompt you to upload your production records. And then when we go through and approve your school meals application, we will also approve those production records or follow up with you if there's missing items on those that need to be added. The production record forms are available on the Nutrition Services website and in your handout packet. Next slide. The production records in your handout packet, there are blank ones to start with. So there is the breakfast and lunch production record. These are the standard production record used by the majority of our schools. We also have additional breakfast and lunch forms. So in your handout packet, you'll also find a blank multi-day food bar form. And this can be used for your fresh fruit and vegetable bar or your condiment bars in order to record those items over the course of a week. We also have a multi-day milk form, which is optional. If you can track your milk either on your breakfast and lunch production record, or you can use this multi-day milk form if you want to track your milk usage by day separate for breakfast and lunch over the course of a week. So some schools just like to keep this by their milk cooler and track their milk usage on this rather than their breakfast and lunch production record. Either way is fine as long as milk is documented. And then you have your delivery ticket for meal service. So this is going to be used for food that is prepared at one site and then sent to a receiving site. Typically, these are vended programs, maybe like a public school in town is sending meals to the private school. Also, the delivery ticket for meal service should be used if you're sending food to a classroom. So if you're serving preschoolers in the classroom, you should also be sending a delivery ticket so that the preschool staff know how much to serve those preschoolers. And then also in your packet, we have the after school snack production record. We will not be going through that during this section, but later on during the after school snack portion of the training, we will cover the after school snack production record. One way to organize your production records would be with a 3-ring binder. You can separate breakfast from lunch and then every day file the most current production record on top. So we see that a lot. We see a lot of 3-ring binders. Once again, if you want to fill them out on the computer, you can also do that, but make sure you have a backup to your electronic records. Next slide. So let's take a look at the new forms. The first one is the new breakfast production record, the top of that. It is available as a fillable PDF or as a Word version. You don't have to fill them out on the computer. Like I said, you can still print them out and write on them. If you print them out, they will not look blue like they do here on the screen. This is just showing that it's a fillable PDF. Making them fillable means hopefully it'll be easier to pre-print that general information and those items that are available on a daily basis before you make copies, to save yourself some time and make the filling out these production records a little bit easier. In the red boxes, you can see just the few changes that we made to the top of the production record. So we moved offer versus serve and grade groups to the top, and that was to give you more room to write down at the bottom for your menu and your grade groups. We did take out the vegetable, grain, meat alternate info that was over to the right, because we've now moved that crediting information to the bottom, which you'll see when we look down at the bottom portion of the production record. And then we've moved the pre-K, the planned number of pre-K meals, to the beginning. So you have your plan number of pre-K, plan number for K through 5, plan for 6 through 8, and 9 through 12, just because preschool is becoming so common and a lot of schools now do have preschool meal service. Next slide. At the bottom, the red boxes point out the changes we made to the bottom of the production record. So like I mentioned, we did add a column and a box where you can just check if an item is whole grain rich. So that's where you can just place an X or a check mark if your items are whole grain rich. We are only asking for the planned number of a la carte or seconds that you're planning to sell, rather than the number of a la cartes that were sold. And this is because most schools can get that information from their point of service software or other documentation where they record how many a la carte items were sold. And then we added that column to your record to record how your items contribute to meal patterns. So now on the far right-hand side, you're going to record if your item provides, 2 meat alternate, 2-ounce equivalents of grain, a half a cup of fruit. How are the items you are serving contributing to meal pattern? Next slide. The new lunch production record is very similar to the breakfast production record. So same thing, we just moved that offer versus serve and for what grades have offer versus serve to the top of the production record, and added that number of planned meals for pre-K column at the beginning. Next slide. The bottom is also basically the same as the breakfast, except for we've added more lines for meat alternate and vegetables on the lunch production record. And that's just because of how the meal pattern works for breakfast and lunch. We typically see more meat alternate items at lunch than at breakfast. Same thing here, you still have that column to record if an item is whole grain rich, where you can just check or make an X for it. You're going to be recording your planned number of a la carte and how the food items contribute to meal pattern. Next slide. Up next, we have the new multi-day food bar production record. So on this record, you do need to record daily your items that are set out. So you need to record the time and temperature for potentially hazardous foods each day for those items that are set out. So some examples of those would be cut tomatoes, melon, lettuce, or romaine, and any protein items such as hummus. And this was one request from the health inspectors, that you record the time and temperature of those potentially hazardous foods set out daily on this production record. And now, instead of adding up the total for the week, you're going to be recording your starting quantity and leftover quantity daily. So rather than just recording if you added, a fruit or vegetable each day, you're going to record your starting quantity of each item and your leftover quantity of each item daily. And this is because it will, for some schools, if they didn't add to the fruit and vegetable bar that day, then it made it appear that they didn't have any fruits or vegetables that day. So this just makes it more clear which fruits or vegetables you had each day, how much you started with, and how much you ended with. Next slide. Next up, we have the multi-day milk, and it is fillable now. I think that is the only change that we made to the optional multi-day milk form from last school year. You can record your milk on your breakfast and lunch production record or here on this multi-day milk form if that's easier for you. You do need to record your milk by type for breakfast and lunch with a starting count, ending count, and the amount used. So either way, whether you record it here or on your breakfast or lunch production record, it has to be recorded by type with a start count, end count, and how much you have used. So if you've been around for a while, we did at one point allow milk recipes where you could record 80% of the milk was skim chocolate and 20% was 1% white. That is no longer allowed. You do have to count the actual milks by type for both breakfast and lunch. Next slide. On the new delivery ticket, it now contains a place to record multiple entree choices. We found that even many vended sites had more than one entree option. So on the number of meals ordered, it's now divided by grade, and on the number of meals ordered, it's now divided by grade group. So you can record your grade group, how many meals you ordered for pre-K, K through 5, 6 through 8, and a blank space if you have another grade group. You will not only include the number of first meals you served, but you're also, if you're ordering any second meals, then you'll also record the second meals that you ordered here as well. The number of adult meals and total meals ordered is also on here. So you'll record how many adult meals you're ordering and then the total meals that you've ordered for that day. On the bottom left portion, it's a little bit small and hard to see here on this slide, but there is now a spot to record the time and temperature at the prep site, as well as the time and temperature taking at the receiving site. You'll record your menu for the day, and then we've also added a place to record portion sizes by grade group for the receiving site. So that's now divided into grade groups of pre-K, K through 5, 6 through 8, and you can an extra spot if you have grades 9 through 12 or a different grade configuration. We have added more space and instructions to record the starting count, end count, and the amount of milk used, and a place to record leftover meals for food items and any special instructions or notes for the receiving site. Next slide. Up next, we're going to go through some production record examples. So completing production records can be a team effort. This is a picture that one of our specialists took out of school. They have production records on clipboards with pins attached. They have their breakfast and lunch production records color-coded on different colored paper. And this was just an easy way for their staff to complete their production records. So just one example. There are lots of good ways to complete production records. But once again, depending on how your food service director wants it done, it does not have to be just the responsibility of the food service director. It can be a team effort where everyone is helping complete those production records to show that meal pattern has been met and that you're eligible for the reimbursement. Next slide. The first example we're going to go through is an example of a breakfast production record. So this is the top half of the production record. First, you're going to record the name of your site. So here we have Apple Elementary School, the date and which day of the week it is, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. If you have offer versus serve, you're going to check yes or no on that. And then for what grades have offer versus serve. So here, all grades K through 5 have the offer versus serve. Down below is the menu or your planned menu for the day. So this is your plan for the day, which can be done in advance, but make sure you're recording all food components, including any alternate entree options. Up above there, you're going to want to record the planned number of student and adult lunches in the top left-hand corner. So we can see they've planned for 60 student breakfast and 1 adult breakfast. And then down below in the menu is where we want you to record the entire menu for the day. So record all your food components and entree choices if you have more than one. Make sure that it is clear what the students can take. So on this day, we can see in this example, the students can choose from cereal and toast. We know they can take both the cereal and toast, or the cherry fruital. The other items, the fruit cup, the fruit juice, and milk are all part of the menu for the day. Over to the right, they've recorded their planned number for K through 5, so they're planning to serve 60 students. And then the planned portion size is for each of those items. So for the cereal bowl and toast, they can take 1 cereal bowl and 1 toast, or 1 cherry fruital, a half a cup of fruit, 4 fluid ounces of fruit juice, and 1 cup or 8 fluid ounces of milk. Be sure that when you're recording fruits and vegetables, that you are recording those in half cup or 1 cup portion sizes. Sometimes we see that recorded as 4 ounces, and that is a weight measure, or if you're 4 fluid ounces is a fluid measure. So when you're serving fruits and vegetables, you're planning for half cup, 3/4 cup, 1 cup portion sizes. So record that, how those items are being served. This example is also available in your handout packet. Next slide. The bottom half is where you're going to record the total quantities of food prepared, planned for a la carte sales, and leftovers, the amount left over. In the first column on the left is where you're going to record the food items used. So here we have our grains, our cereal, Trix bowl pack, our Fruit Loop bowl pack, our cherry fruital, and our toast. Under fruits, we have our applesauce fruit cup, and then we have apple and orange fruit juice. Here they've recorded the milk, so chocolate skim, 1% white, and skim white. And then don't forget to record your condiments, though. So they had jelly and margarine for the toast, as well as at the bottom how many they've served. So they ended up serving 50 students, 1 adult, 1 food service staff, and 52 total meals. In the next column on over to the right, that's where you're going to mark if the item's whole grain rich. So the cereal, the cherry fruital, and the toast were all whole grain rich items, and they've put an X in that column to indicate that. The next column is where you're going to indicate if it's a school recipe or the product brand or number, or if it's a commodity item. So when we're talking about product brands, we're not talking about Cashway or US Foods. Those are your distributors, and those distributors can have several different products of, let's say if it was lunch, a chicken nugget, they could have several different chicken nuggets available. So we want to know the product brand. So here we have product brands like General Mills, Kellogg's, Pillsbury, Highland. Those are your product brands. In the next column, you're going to record the number of seconds or a la carte that you've planned to sell or serve. And then in the 5th column is where you're going to record the total amount of food prepared by recording the number of servings or pounds, or number 10 cases or pieces. Just avoid documenting cases and bags unless you're going to record the case count, the weight, or the number of servings in each case or bag, as these vary by brand. And as a reviewer, we might not know by looking at your records how much is in each case or bag. The total amount prepared is going to include the amount you have planned for a la carte. So here they've planned to sell 5 extra cherry Fruitles as a la carte, and they've included that in the total amount that they've prepared. Next is the amount left over column. This column is required, and you'll want to record the amount left over in the same units as you've recorded how much food you've prepared. So for the cereal, they had 30 1-ounce bowl packs. They had 15 1-ounce bowl packs left over. Down at the Cherry Fruitle, they had 65 Cherry Fruitles. They had 10 Cherry Fruitles left over, so on and so forth. We can see down under the applesauce, they've recorded 60 half-cup portions, and they had 10 half-cup portions left over. Now, let's say the applesauce came in a number 10 can instead of a fruit cup. You could record, how many number 10 cans you started with and how many number 10 cans you ended with. You just want it to be the same unit. So how much you prepared and how much was left over recorded in the same unit. And now on that far right-hand column is where you're going to record how your items contribute to meal pattern. So our cereal, those each provide 1 ounce equivalent of grains. Our Cherry Fruitle provides 2 ounce equivalent of grains, and our toast provides 1 ounce equivalent of grains. Our fruit is going to credit for a half a cup of fruit. And then once again, you can record the milk here if you want to count it here on this production record, or you can use that multi-day milk form and record the milk count by type on that. If you do that, you could just write C multi-day milk form, and then we would know to go to that specific form to look for your milk counts for that day. We already talked about under other is where you're going to record the condiments for the day, and those do need to be recorded either here or on the multi-day form. They are not a component, but they do contribute to your dietary specifications, so your sodium, calories, and fat. So they do need to be documented either here or on your multi-day form. Next slide. The next example is an example of a lunch production record. So once again, it is the same same as the breakfast. So you're going to list the name of your site. Once again, this is something that you could pre-print on all of your production records so that you don't have to write the name of your site every day. Your date, the day of the week. You're going to check if it's offer versus serve and for what grades have offer versus serve. You're going to list your menu for the day, so all the food components and your entree choices for the day. So in this example, we're having a cheeseburger on a bun, or they can choose from a taco salad. So those are the 2 entree choices. They're also having roasted corn, a fresh fruit and vegetable bar. Make sure you record if that is part of your menu for the day, and milk. You do need to record the cooking time and temperature on both your breakfast and lunch production records. I saw that question in the chat, but yes, you do record the time and temperature on your breakfast and lunch production records as well, and that is listed up here in the top portion, and that is required. And then your number of planned for K through 5, so 150. They plan for 150. One cheeseburger or taco salad, or 1 taco salad, a half a cup of corn, self-serve for the fresh fruit and vegetable bar. So you can record SS for self-serve if you're not recording a specific portion size, and 1 cup of milk. Over on the right-hand side, they've recorded their vegetable subgroup key. So we can see that the taco salad is going to provide a red, orange, and dark green subgroups. the roasted corn is going to provide a starchy subgroup. And then the fruit and vegetable bar, there is a place on that multi-day food bar record to record the vegetable subgroups on that. So you don't have to try to record all of the subgroups here. If you're using the multi-day bar, you can record the vegetable subgroups on that as well. There is a key down at the bottom, so you don't have to try to memorize those. RO equals red, orange, DG equals dark green, so on and so forth. On the cooking time and temperature, you can record that on your production record, or if you're recording that on a different log, that is also okay, but you need to have it recorded one place or the other, wherever your health inspector wants it recorded. Next slide. On the bottom half, notice that the bottom half of the lunch food production record is divided into the 5 food components. And at lunch, you must offer 5 food components. So you do need to have something recorded in all 5 food components on your lunch production record. As a menu planner, if you don't have something to record in one of those components, you know something, you need to go back to your menu and look and double check your menu for that day to make sure that you have all 5 food components planned. On the left-hand side is where you're going to record those menu items, making sure you're recording all the food items you're serving. So in this example, they're having that cheeseburger. So under meat alternate, they have their beef patty, their cheese slice, and their taco salad. Under grains, they have their hamburger bun. And then under the vegetables, they have roasted corn. And then they're also having that fresh fruit and vegetable bar. So they've written C, multi-day food bar, for both the vegetables and the fruits. So we know to go to that record to look for the remaining fruits and vegetables. For milk, we have chocolate skim, white skim, and white 1%. And then they're also recording their condiments on that multi-day food bar. In the next column, you're going to check if the item is whole grain rich. So we can see our taco salad also has some grain in with it, and those tortilla chips or whatever it may be are whole grain rich, and our hamburger bun for the day is whole grain rich. Under where we indicate if it's a school recipe, a product brand number, or commodity item, we can see the beef patty and cheese slice are commodity, and the taco salad and is a school recipe. So school recipe number 106. So we know we can go there to look for that recipe. And we would ask for you to provide that recipe at an administrative review. The hamburger buns are Rotellas, and the roasted corn is also a school recipe, and our milk is Highland. In the next column, they record the planned number of a la carte or seconds they're planning to sell for each of those, and then the total amount prepared. So they've prepared 135 beef patties, 135 cheese slices, and 30 taco salads. And then next, you're going to record the amount left over. Remember, just like for breakfast, you want to record the amount left over in the same unit as the amount you prepared. So they prepared 135 each beef patties, and they have 5 each beef patties left over. Down under roasted corn, they prepared 155 servings, those half-cup servings, and they had 10 half-cup servings left over. Just remember the amount left over is required. Don't leave that column blank. We sometimes see that blank and we don't know what that means. Did you not have any leftovers? Did you just forget to record the leftovers for the day? So it is important to record how much you had left over at the end of meal service. And then finally, in that far right-hand column is where you're going to record how your item contributes to meal patterns. So our beef patty had provided 1.5 meat alternate. The cheese slice was a 0.5 meat alternate. Our taco salad provided 2 meat alternate, 2-ounce equivalents of grain, and 1 cup of vegetable. Our hamburger bun was a 2-ounce equivalent grain, and our roasted corn provided a 1/2 cup of vegetable as well. At the bottom, they've recorded that they served 140 students. Their actual meal count for the day was 140 students, 10 adults, and 3 food service staff, for a total of 153 meals actually served for that day. Next slide. Next, we have an example of a multi-day milk form. Like I said, this is optional. If you record milk on your breakfast and lunch production record, you don't have to use this. But if you want to use this to record it by day um, for the week, you can use that. You'll fill out for the week. So this is for the week of May 10th and the year. And then your flavor and fat content, we have white 1% and chocolate skim milk. It's a Highland brand and it's 8 fluid ounces is the serving size. And then they've recorded their starting count, their end count, and the amount used for each milk type for each day separately for breakfast and for lunch. So for breakfast, they've recorded how much they've started and ended with and how much they used. And for lunch, they've recorded how much they've started, ended with, and the amount used. And then you'll fill in your school name in the top right-hand corner. You can record the number served for the week. That is optional, but if that's helpful for you as far as ordering, you can, of course, also fill in the optional total amount used for the week. Next slide. Next up, we're going to talk about recording food items on the multi-day food bar record. So for self-serve fruit and these are for self-serve fruit and vegetable bars. They can also be used for condiments. If all students do not have access to that food bar, then you'll want to record the grades and the number of students with access to that bar on the form. Record the time and temperature, the starting quantity, and the leftover quantity daily. And you can also record 1 week's worth on the form. So that is the advantage of using the multi-day form, is you can keep track over the course of the week. Also, it provides you with some more lines, especially if you have a fruit and vegetable bar. It's sometimes hard to fit all your fruits and vegetables on just your breakfast or lunch production record. So it gives you a little bit more room to record and write all the fruits and vegetables that you put out there on that bar daily. In the next slide, we have an example of a completed fruit multi-day food bar record. So once again, at the top, if all students don't have access to this food bar, then you're going to want to indicate the grades and the number with access. This site is Jolly Schools, and they have listed the food items used. So be specific on the food items you use so we can see that it's romaine lettuce, baby carrots, oranges cut into wedges, orange wedges, canned peaches, so we know if it's fresh peaches or canned peaches. The next column there is a place to record the product brand or school recipe, or if it's a commodity item. The next column is where you're going to record that vegetable subgroup, and there is also, once again, a key at the top for your vegetable subgroups. And then the unit of weight, volume, or number of servings. So here's where you're going to record how items are put out onto the food bar. Once again, do not use units that aren't measurable, such as bags of lettuce. We don't know how much is in that bag of lettuce, and unless you're going to say like 5-pound bags of lettuce. In this example, the romaine lettuce is a Dole brand. It counts towards the dark green vegetable subgroup. It's being tracked or put out in the bar in pounds. Notice we didn't say 5 bags here because we don't know how much that is. And then on Monday, they put out 15 pounds of lettuce and had 2 pounds left over. On Tuesday, they put out 10 pounds of lettuce and had 2 left over. Wednesday, they put out 5 pounds and had 3 left over. Thursday, they put out 10 pounds and didn't have any left over. And then on Friday, they put out 6 more pounds and once again, did not have any left over. So you're just recording this daily rather than just how much you put out each day and then totaling it over the course of the week. That's how it was done on the old one. The new one, you're just going to record how much you started with and ended with each day, just to simplify it a little bit. That was confusing for a lot of schools, so we tried to simplify this a bit, just for how much you started with and ended with each day. Once again, be sure you're recording the time and temperature for those potentially hazardous foods that are set out. This was requested by the health inspectors, so they will be looking for it. We did have some questions at the in-person training. If your health inspector wants it recorded on a different temperature log, that's okay. But just make sure that you are recording it and you can produce that for both us and your health inspectors. In this example, they're also recording condiments on a multi-day food bar record. Once again, record how those items are being put out on the bar. So is it in cups or quarts, individual packets, pre-portioned cups, etc. How much you started with and how much you ended with for each day of your condiments. Next slide. The meal delivery ticket is for food that's prepared at one site and then sent to a receiving site. So typically those vended programs. You can also use this when you're sending food to a classroom. Like we said, if you're sending food down to the preschool classroom, you would want to send a meal delivery ticket. Remember, if you're the production kitchen, so if you're the site that's preparing the food, you must complete and maintain the production record with the total amounts of food you prepared. Then you're going to send this delivery ticket to the receiving site, and the receiving site must record any additional food items served, such as condiments, your fruit and vegetable bar. Maybe they have their own fruit and vegetable bar. Sometimes, in addition to the main meal, sites have their own fruit and vegetable bars. A lot of times the receiving site is ordering or getting their own milk, so they're tracking their own milk. And then the receiving site also needs to document any leftovers for the day. Of course, when you're delivering food, you do need to maintain temperatures. And we have a place to document that for both the prep site and receiving site now. Next slide. As we can see in this example, the site name is Apple Elementary School, and they've recorded the date and their delivery time, or if you pick it up, you could record your pickup time for the day. They have 2 entree choices to order from. So they have their cheeseburger or taco salad, and they've ordered 75 cheeseburgers and 25 taco salads. 3 adult meals for a total of 103 meals total they've ordered. Down below, on the bottom portion, the time and temperature at the prep site is recorded, as well as the time and temperature at the receiving site. The menu for the day is listed with portion sizes that the staff at the receiving site are to serve the students. So for the cheeseburger, they're going to get a beef patty that credits for 1.5 meat alternate. For grades K through 5, they're going to give them each 1 beef patty, one as well as 1 cheese slice that credits for 0.5 meat alternate. A whole grain rich hamburger bun that credits for 2 ounce equivalents of grains. They'll get one bun, 1 patty, and 1 cheese slice if they're having the cheeseburger. For the taco salad, it's a whole grain rich taco salad that provides 2 ounces of meat alternate, 2 ounce equivalents of grain, and 1 cup of vegetable. If they've chosen the taco salad entree option, they'll receive 1 taco salad. In addition, they'll also be served roasted potatoes, a half a cup of roasted potatoes, a half a cup of fresh pineapple, and then 1 cup of milk. Over on the right-hand side is where you would record any other foods used, such as condiments and other foods used. So they had ketchup. They used 6 cups of ketchup and 105 2-ounce portions of ranch for their condiments. And then they had, this site has their own vegetables, extra vegetables that they sent out. So they used 2 pounds of shredded lettuce and 5 pounds of baby carrots, in addition to the fruits and vegetables that came with the meal. And then milk, just like for the breakfast and regular breakfast and lunch production record, the receiving site does need to be recording milk usage by type for each milk. So here they have their skim chocolate, their 1% white and skim white, how much they started with at this meal service, how much they ended with, and how much was used. So record the start count and count and the amount used by milk type for each day. And then leftovers, they had 5 cheeseburgers left over and 2 taco salads left over. By recording leftovers, hopefully that will help, the receiving site track waste and also adjust their ordering to prevent waste in the future. And then the special instructions where the shredded lettuce and baby carrots are self-serve. At the bottom portion on the bottom left-hand side is where the signature of staff at the receiving site will sign the delivery ticket. Next slide. Record for production records and recipes. For record retention, you do need to keep these for 3 years plus the current year, unless your school or your district or organization has a longer record retention policy, then you need to follow that. For HACCP records, you need to keep those for 1 year plus the current year, unless your health inspector asks you to keep those for longer. So I know some health inspectors have requested you to keep those for, I think, 3 years plus the current. If that's the case, if that's the health inspector in your area, then follow the most restrictive record retention policy. Remember, these are property of the school district and must be easily retrievable. And if you're saving anything electronically, make sure you maintain a backup file. So for example, if you start completing your production records electronically or saving them to your computer, don't just save them to your desktop. Make sure that they are saved either in a cloud or on an offsite server. We have had schools get hacked or have their production records stolen. That has actually happened. So, and if you don't have your information backed up off site, then there's no way to retrieve those. So make sure that if you are going to store them electronically, you have a way to a backup and a way to retrieve those off site as well. Okay, so you have been with us for almost an hour now, and we are going to take a 10-minute break for you to stand, stretch, digest all of that production record information. And when we come back, Sean will start us off with identifying a reimbursable meal, offer versus serve, and point of service meal counting. So 10 minutes, let's be back at 10:08.
Well, I've checked my clock and it is 10:08. Welcome back from your break. Let's get started with our next topics, which are identifying a reimbursable meal, offer versus serve, and point of service meal counting. Next slide. So, a requirement from USDA is that signage must be displayed at or near the beginning of the serving line for both breakfast and lunch. The purpose of this required signage is to assist students in identifying the components of a reimbursable meal. So if you are serving breakfast, you need breakfast signage. If you're serving lunch, you need lunch signage. And lots of things happen over summer break. And so now is the time to be ensuring that your posters are still intact and available for students to view when school starts. So next slide. So if something has happened over the summer with painting walls or repair, you will want to ensure that you have signage for when school starts. And signage can be ordered from the Nutrition Services homepage. And on the slide, you will see that you would go to Nutrition Services Home and then material order form. So this is the location where you could order your signage, as well as if you need the non-discrimination poster, the And Justice for All. You can go to this location to order both of those items. And we'll be talking about civil rights a little bit later in today's presentation. But ensure that your signage is visible to students. Let's go to the next slide and talk about offer versus serve. Now, yesterday we talked about the food components that are required for breakfast and lunch and the required portion sizes that must be offered to students. Today, we are going to be talking about a serving option that is available to schools. And the purpose of that serving option, offer versus serve, it is to allow students to decline food items. The goal is to minimize plate waste, encourage schools to offer choices, and of course, if students are able to turn down food items that they do not intend on eating, that should improve customer satisfaction. So in your handout packet, we have information about offer versus serve and how it operates in schools. So let's move on to the next slide and talk about the basics. The basics of offer versus serve require that all food components in the required portion sizes be offered to students. So you are planning your menus with all of the required components in the required portion sizes. The meal must be priced as a unit. So there's no discount if a student does not take all of the 5 food components at breakfast, or I'm sorry, at lunch. The student decides which items to decline. So it's up to the student to make that decision if they do not want a food component. And schools cannot require a student to take an entree and or milk. And that's a frequent question we often receive is, well, they have to take milk. They have to take the entree. If you're a school implementing offer versus serve, it is the student's decision of what food components that they will be taking for the reimbursable meal. You can encourage students to take their milk. You can encourage students to take the entree, but you cannot require them. So next slide. So the student must select under offer versus serve for a reimbursable lunch. It must contain at least 3 different components. One must be at least a half a cup of fruit, vegetable, or a combination of the two to equal that half cup requirement. So for lunch, a reimbursable lunch meal could be as simple as a cheeseburger on a bun, because I have my grain and I have my meat component, and a half a cup of green beans or a half a cup of fruit vegetable from my multi-day food bar, my fruit vegetable bar. A reimbursable breakfast must contain at least 3 food items. One must be at least a half a cup of fruit or veggie if substituting. So once again, I'm looking for that half a cup of fruit or veggie on that tray and 2 other food items. So that could be as simple as a carton of milk, a bowl pack cereal that contributes 1 ounce equivalent of grain, and my half cup juice. That is a reimbursable breakfast. Moving on to the next slide. As we've already discussed, students are charged the full price for the meal, whether it contains 3, 4, or all 5 components. The cashier must be able to recognize a reimbursable meal. I often say that during an administrative review, one of the most important people is the cashier, because the cashier is identifying that the student is present and that the student has the reimbursable meal that is being counted and claimed for reimbursement. So the cashier must be able to identify what constitutes a reimbursable meal. Now, if the student does not have 3 components, then they should be asked to select more. That could be asking them to return to the fruit vegetable bar if they do not have a half a cup of fruit or vegetable on their tray. Now, they cannot be counted until that student has returned to the bar and come back through for that cashier to identify that they do have a reimbursable meal. Now, some schools have whole pieces of fruits at the cashiering station, like apples, oranges, bananas, and then they can offer that student those whole pieces of fruit to avoid having them have to go back to a fruit vegetable bar and come back through the line. That seems to work very well. The responsibility is that the student has to leave the line with those 3 components, and one of those being a half a cup of fruit or vegetable. Now, the student doesn't have to eat what they take after they leave the line, but they must have the 3 components on their tray for the meal to be counted for reimbursement. Now, those situations where perhaps maybe it's a high school or middle school, elementary, if a student refuses to go back and get that additional component, then the meal cannot be claimed for reimbursement, and the student must be charged a la carte pricing for the food items taken. So if they refuse, then a la carte pricing for what they do have on their tray, cannot claim the meal for reimbursement. Next slide. Offer versus serve at lunch is mandatory for high school. It is optional for all other grades. So for K through 8, it is optional. We certainly encourage it because we do not want to see students take food items that they do not intend on eating. In the absence of offer versus serve, then all trays must contain all 5 food components in the required portion sizes. Now, if we think about maybe a kindergartner, first grader, second grader, if we remember from our training yesterday in part 1, we're talking about the required daily portion size for vegetable is 3/4 cup. For fruit, it is a 1/2 cup. And if we're planning to meet the weekly requirements for meat and for grains, it could be 2 ounces of meat alternate and 2 ounce equivalent of grains. That is a substantial amount of food on a tray. So that is why we encourage offer versus serve for all grades. Once again, at lunch, students must select at a minimum at least a 1/2 cup of fruit and or vegetable. They may decline up to 2 components. So can you see why that cashier is so important, that they actually have to be able to look at that tray and determine that student has a reimbursable meal? So they are looking for at least that 1/2 cup of fruit or vegetable and 2 other components at lunch. They would need to know some of those things we learned yesterday. And one of those is that the green leafy credits at 1/2 the volume. So if the student only has the green leafy vegetable on their tray, then that cashier would be looking for at least 1 cup serving of the green leafy, which would be equivalent to the 1/2 cup vegetable requirement. So let's move on to offer versus serve at breakfast. Required to offer a minimum of the 3 required components. And if we remember from yesterday, those required components are the 1 cup requirement of fruit/juice. The other component would be our grain or our meat alternate, and our milk. And remember, we can serve vegetables in place of our fruit at breakfast. So our required 3 components. With offer versus serve, you must offer 4 food items. The student may decline 1 item, but must take at a minimum a 1/2 cup of fruit, juice, or vegetable. So that must be on their tray. Offer versus serve is optional for all grade groups, but once again, we encourage it to avoid plate waste and increase student satisfaction. Next slide. Schools that do not implement offer versus serve, so perhaps in elementary, all students must leave the serving line with all food components items for breakfast in the required portion size. And we've already discussed how that can appear to be a lot of food on a tray, especially for a younger student. We encourage offer versus serve for all grades at schools. Next slide. Now, I've already talked about how important that cashier is, or that point of service person, because once again, that is defined as that point in the serving line where it can be accurately determined a reimbursable meal has been taken by a student. So that cashier is very important and needs to understand they are the one determining that that student has a reimbursable meal. In your handout packet, after the offer versus serve, we have information about counting meals, and it discusses the point of service meal count. This is a good reference to share if your staff, food service staff, is not conducting the point of service meal count or manning the cashiering stations, because it goes through the importance of that, and it also goes through why that point of service meal count must be taken after all food components are offered, and what are unacceptable ways of taking the daily meal count. So let's move to the next slide. The meal count must be taken at the end of the serving line or at a location after all food components have been offered. So it must be taken after fruit and vegetable bars, after milk has been offered. It must be at the end of the fruit and veggie bar or food lines. If you have condiments, condiments are not food components, and so those can be offered after the point of service meal count. In fact, I would encourage you to move them away from the cashiering station to avoid any bottlenecks. But it just make sure that your point of service meal count is taken after all food components have been offered. And this would also apply if meals are taken to classrooms, that a morning count is not the same as a point of service meal count. A lot can happen from a morning count until the food is actually in front of the student. And so if meals are being taken to classrooms, they must be counted after the student has received the reimbursable meal. So a roster must accompany meals that are taken to classrooms. So that might apply to in-school suspension or alternative classrooms. When we talk about pre-K meal pattern and where pre-K eat, that would also include those classrooms if pre-K is eating in the classroom. So an accurate point of service meal count is being taken. Next slide. In your handout packet, we have various resources about offer versus serve and point of service meal counting. And these are very good resources to be shared with the point of service meal count cashier so that they understand the importance of their job, and also the whys behind of where that count needs to be taken, and identifying reimbursable meals. USDA has a great publication on offer versus serve that goes through various scenarios and of the different food components, and I would encourage you to download that manual and refer to it, maybe send it to your POS cashiering. Can you see how important it would be for the food service director to be in communication with that cashier prior to meal service, to identify how food items contribute? So if it's an entree item, making sure that the POS person understands that that's 2 food components, that if it's a hamburger on a bun, that it counts for the grain and the meat alternate, and the student would only need to have that half a cup at a minimum of fruit vegetable on their tray for that reimbursable meal to be counted. So communication is utmost important to make sure that if you have non-food service staff conducting your POS, that they understand how food items on that day contribute to meeting meal pattern. Next slide. USDA also has some great tip sheets on offer versus serve that are available. So we are going to move on to our next topic, which is providing meals for preschoolers in the school meals program. Now, preschool has become almost very commonplace in schools. Probably the majority of schools have a pre-K program, and pre-K programs operate differently in each school district. Some schools have AM, PM pre-K, some have all-day pre-K, some have a combination of both, half-day pre-K and full-day pre-K. But there are some important things to know if you are providing meals to pre-K students, which we're going to discuss next. So let's move to the next slide. So there are 2 different meal patterns for pre-K. There is the school meals pattern based on a child's grade group, and for pre-K, they would be following the meal pattern for K through 5. And then there is also the Child and Adult Care Food Program. And the acronym for that program is the CACFP. And with that meal pattern, the portions are based on a child's age. And there's 2 different age groups that would affect pre-K. There's ages 1 through 2 and ages 3 through 5. Ages 1 through 2 would be early child education. Ages 3 through 5 would be what we typically see for a pre-K program. And so in your handout packet, after the offer versus serve, we're going to find the Child and Adult Care Food Program meal pattern for pre-K. Now, you may be wondering, well, which meal pattern do I use? Allie, would you go to the next slide? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Which meal pattern? Well, it all depends on where and when the children eat. Now, for the school breakfast program and the National School Lunch Program meal pattern, these can be followed when preschoolers are served in the cafeteria at the same time as other students. So this is called co-mingling. And let me define co-mingling a little bit better for you. Co-mingling is when, as a server, I cannot distinguish if that is a pre-K student, a kindergarten student, a first grade student, second grade student. They are commingled and coming through the line all at the same time. So as a server, it would be difficult for me to change my serving utensils to accommodate a pre-K student and then change back immediately to serve a K through 5 student. That is commingling. Now, if pre-K come in to the serving area, all in a group led by adults, and they proceed through the line, they are not commingled. They are not commingled. They are coming in as a separate class. So that would not be commingled. It's only if, as a server, I cannot identify if that is a pre-K student, first grade student, that would require me to change my serving utensils. Now, if they are not commingled, then the CACFP, the Child and Adult Care Food Program meal pattern, must be followed. When preschool meals are served in the classroom or a pre-K classroom, or if preschoolers are not commingled with other students in the cafeteria. So probably the majority of our schools, if they are serving pre-K students, they are not commingled and would be utilizing the CACFP meal pattern, which is in your handout, and we're going to be discussing that next. So next slide. So as we look at that meal pattern, we can see that it is based on the same required components as the school breakfast and as the school lunch program. So we have the same food components. At breakfast, we have 3 required components. And as we look across, we can see the required minimum portion sizes. And we can identify that those portion sizes are significantly less than the school breakfast and lunch program, much more in line with a pre-K student's needs. As we look at lunch, we can see that the requirement for fluid milk, the minimum requirement for ages 3 through 5 is 3/4 cup. And I can certainly serve more. So I can serve an 8-ounce container of milk, a carton of milk. But then as I look down, I can see again that the required portion sizes are significantly less. So let's move to the next slide. Well, there is one component that I want to point out for pre-K that is a little bit different when we compare it to the school lunch meal pattern, and that would be the meat alternate at lunch. Now, the daily requirement for pre-K ages 3 through 5 is 1.5 ounces. If we remember from yesterday, when we discussed what the meat alternate daily requirement at lunch is for our grades K through 8, it is 1 ounce. That's the daily requirement. Then we have our weekly requirements that we have to meet. And if we're planning menus for K through 8, that was the 9-ounce equivalent. So in pre-K meal pattern, we do not have a weekly requirement. We only have daily requirements. And that meat alternate requirement is 1.5 ounces per day. So if I am a school that has been cutting my sandwiches perhaps in half, and we'll go back to that cheeseburger on a bun where it's contributing 2 ounces of meat alternate and 2 ounces of grain, and I've cut it in half, that would be 1 ounce of meat alternate and 1 ounce of grain. Am I meeting the daily requirement for our pre-K students? If I cut that sandwich in half and it is only contributing 1 ounce of meat alternate? The answer is no, because the daily requirement for those children for ages 3 through 5 is 1.5 ounces. So I would need to supplement that with an additional 1/2 ounce of meat alternate. Am I meeting the grain requirement if I cut that sandwich in half? Well, it's 1 ounce of grain equivalent, and my required daily portion size for lunch for grains is 1/2 ounce. So yes, I would be meeting the grain, but I would not be meeting the meat alternate. So wanted to point that out. That's something I see frequently on pre-K menus, is not understanding that it's 1.5 ounces of meat alternate daily for our pre-K students. So let's move to the next slide and talk about milk. For children 3 through 5 years of age, only unflavored 1% or skim milk is allowed. For pre-K students following the CACFP meal pattern, eating in the lunchroom, not commingled, or in the pre-K classroom, you cannot serve flavored milk. They can only have white 1% or skim milk. We're going to see a trend as we discuss the pre-K meal pattern. And the first one is no added sugar for milk. In the CACFP and the school meals pattern, water must be offered at meals. So the same requirement, they must have access to water during meal service. And that is plain water has to be offered. So no flavored or water with different things added to it. So we're talking plain water. Cups must be provided. Let's move to the meat alternate. Next slide. Tofu and yogurt, including soy yogurt, can be served in the CACFP meal pattern. Yogurt must contain no more than 15 grams of sugar per 4-ounce serving. So once again, we're seeing that trend of less sugar content for our pre-K students. 1/2 ounce of, or 1/2 cup of yogurt, which would be a 4 fluid ounce container, is equivalent to 1 ounce of meat alternate. And overall, the meat alternate quantities credit the same as school lunch. So 1 ounce of cheese is equivalent to 1 ounce of meat alternate. A large egg would be equivalent to 2 ounces of meat alternate. So the same crediting as what we saw in the school lunch meal pattern yesterday. Let's click to the next slide, and we'll talk about fruits and veggies. Fruits and vegetables are separate meal components, just like they are in the school lunch meal pattern. Separate components. For ages 3 through 5, the portion size is 1/4 cup of fruit and 1/4 cup of vegetable. A 1/2 cup vegetable may be served in place of the fruit, but must serve two different vegetables. So if I did not offer fruit, that I would need to offer an additional 4th cup of vegetable, and it has to be a different vegetable than the 4th cup I'm already offering. And yesterday I talked about how important it is to read footnotes on meal pattern charts. And once again, I'm going to emphasize that again with the preschool meal pattern chart, that a lot of information is found in the footnote section of this meal pattern as well. And then the final bullet on the slide is juice. Limited to serving once a day per child. So if I offer juice at breakfast, I cannot offer juice at lunch. Next slide, we're going to talk about grains. At least 1 serving per day must be whole grain rich. Breakfast cereals must contain no more than 6 grams of sugar per dry ounce. And so that's our 3rd reference for this meal pattern of reduced sugar content. We've talked about the milk, we've talked about yogurt, and now we've talked about the breakfast cereals that can be offered for our pre-K students. And in your handout packet, there is additional information on sugar limits with yogurt, choosing breakfast cereals that are lower in added sugar. And we have the grain serving sizes for the CFP program. And there's additional footnotes on that grains chart that is specific to CACFP. And then another bullet on the slide is grain-based desserts not credible in CACFP. So grain-based desserts are not credible in that program, with the exception of muffins, quick breads, graham crackers, and animal crackers. So other dessert type items may not be served. So an example of that would be perhaps your pre-K eat in the cafeteria. They come in separate, so they are served the pre-K meal pattern. And on your regular menu for the other students that day, there is a cookie. Well, our pre-K students cannot have that cookie because dessert type items may not be served. So that would be our 4th restriction on the sugar content of the meals that are offered to pre-K students. So let's move to the next slide. Now, many pre-K programs offer a snack in the morning or a snack in the afternoon, or if you have a pre-K program operating at your school and they don't have access to breakfast or lunch, then perhaps maybe you are asked to provide a snack, an AM or a PM snack to those students. But those snacks served during the school day cannot be claimed for reimbursement. There is no snack program under the school meals pattern that allows for those types of snacks to be claimed for reimbursement. And they would be considered non-reimbursable snacks. Non-reimbursable snacks may need to follow the CACFP meal pattern for licensing requirements, but there are not any requirements under the school meals program. That would be a question to ask the pre-K program director if there are requirements for offering snacks. The preschool snack cannot be paid for out of the school meals account. The cost of providing those snacks must be billed to preschool or the general fund, and payment must be received back into the program for those non-reimbursable snacks. Let's move to the next slide. Other program considerations. Well, production records are required, and as Erica talked about, our newly revised production records, there is the first column on that production record is recording the portion sizes planned for pre-K, and total production would be included on the bottom of the record. You are required to keep a label information for those items that are specifically used for pre-K, just like any other label information. So that might include documentation of your yogurt label if you're serving yogurt to your pre-K, to demonstrate that it's meeting the lowered sugar requirements, the breakfast cereal served to pre-K, to also document that you're meeting the lower sugar content. So all of that does need to be recorded, and then the documentation to support meeting meal pattern must be on file. And then for food production, frying is not allowed in the pre-K meal pattern. Not that any of you are actually frying foods anyway, but this is specific to the CACFP pre-K meal pattern. Offer versus serve is not an option when utilizing the CACFP meal pattern. And then many of our pre-K programs are served in the classroom and are utilizing the family style meal service. And so we're going to be talking about what family style meal service entails. So let's move to the next slide. So with adult supervision, children are seated at tables and they serve themselves, just like in the picture on the slide, that each food component in sufficient quantity must be available for each child to select at least the minimum required portion size. So food is sent to the classroom, typically in bowls, and then the number of students that will be seated at a table times the required portion size. That's the quantity of food that is placed in the bowls or available to students. And then the food is passed around. A child may decline all foods as long as each food component is offered more than once. So the adult is present, encouraging the student to try the different food items, continuing to encourage during meal service the student to try the food items. So that is how family style meal service works, is that all food components are available on the table for the student. Typically, the student is perhaps serving or pouring their own milk into cups, and they have plates in front of them, and the bowls or quantity of food is continually offered to the students, encouraging them to try new and different food items. So let's go to the next slide, and I'm going to be turning it over to Allie.
Thank you, Shawn. Okay, we are on the last, headed towards the last section of today's training. So the following topics I'm going to cover in 1 to 2 slides. I'll give you a brief introduction of the topic, And then if you're interested in more information or more in-depth training, we will have this on our website. So just keep that in mind as we're going through the topics. So things we're going to cover today in this section are civil rights, special diets, professional standards, non-program foods and smart snacks, procurement and purchasing, and USDA foods. So starting with civil rights, knowledge of civil rights and equal treatment for all and the USDA non-discrimination statement must be included in program information. The full statement must be included in the student handbook at the end of the section that addresses the lunch program. The "And Justice for All" poster must be posted in the food service area and be visible to program participants. On menus, it can be a single sentence, USDA is an equal opportunity provider. Schools are also required to provide annual training for the food service staff on civil rights. This documentation of the training must be kept on file. Let's look at the next slide to see where you can find some resources on our webpage. So as you can see on our webpage, we have several resources. We have forms available to you for documenting your civil rights training, and we also have civil rights PowerPoints available for you that you can use to train your staff for this required training each year. When documenting the training, include the staff name, the position of the staff, the name of the training, and if receiving continuing education hours. Make sure to include the length of the training as your documentation. All of these items are needed and will be required if requested from our office. Moving on to special diets, Americans with Disabilities Act defines the meaning and interpretation of the term disability. The definition includes anything that affects a major life activity. These changes have made it easier for individuals to establish a disability. Most physical and mental impairments constitute a disability. It is important the food service staff is aware of the procedures for handling dietary requests. Food service must work with the households to best meet the nutritional needs of the student. Households must be informed of the process and procedure for requesting student meal accommodation requests. So on the next slide, we'll review the accommodations. For accommodations within the meal pattern requirement, a request form completed by the parent is acceptable and no medical statement is required. So an example of this would be Johnny is allergic to strawberries, but the SFA is able to offer different fruit whenever strawberries are menued, so the meal pattern is still met. For accommodations outside of the meal pattern, a request form needs to be completed by the parent along with a medical note signed by a licensed healthcare provider. So in this example, Abby has celiac disease and requires a gluten-free diet. A medical statement would be necessary, and the food service staff should work with the household to determine the appropriate accommodation. It should be noted that a gluten-free grain item should be available for the student to select. It is not allowed to ask the student to just not take the grain offering within offer versus serve. For lifestyle choices, consider offering menu options to accommodate. If utilizing offer versus serve, students can make choices. It is not required to make any changes. A student prefers not having an item offered. Also on our website, we have additional resources for you on special diets. We also have the forms included in your packet today. Things that are included on the website are additional forms and resources. And again, more training is available if you're interested. Jessica Formansky, another program specialist in our department, can help you with any questions that you have on special diets. She's also very familiar with the special diets and works in that area quite a bit. So if you have specific questions, she is a good one to reach out to, or any of us. Moving on to professional standards. There's a couple handouts in your packet on professional standards. So the first one we're looking at is the USDA hiring standards. There's a minimum for new school nutrition program directors on those hiring standards. On the slide, we see a snip of the USDA handout, and it shows the hiring standards table. Hiring standards include education and experience requirements. New food service directors must also be certified in food safety not more than 5 years prior to their starting date or within 30 days of their start date. This is mandatory that the new directors obtain the certification by completing one of the courses listed on the slide. FSAs must hire staff that meet these standards and supply documentation upon request. We also have Beth Haas listed on the screen. We have her email address. She is our expert in the food safety area. So if you have questions on these courses or on this section, you can also reach out to Beth or any of us. USDA Food and Nutrition Services requires professional standards educational training for school nutrition professionals. The rule requires a minimum amount of annual training hours for all school nutrition program directors, managers, and staff. Required training topic areas will vary according to position and job requirements. The NDE Professional Standards handout shown on the slide and in your packet has links to those trainings, and resources are also included on our webpage. Also included is a training tracker log that can be accessed in the links on our website or in your handout. Again, this is the log that you would use to track all your training. And a reminder that civil rights is required each year. Civil rights training is one of those trainings that must be done and included on that tracker. Moving on to non-program foods. Definition of a non-program food is any non-reimbursable food or beverage purchased using funds from the nonprofit food service account. This includes the sale of second entrees, milk, snacks, and adult meals. The food service program cannot financially support the sale of non-program food items and non-reimbursable meals. This means federal dollars cannot be used to support the sale of these items. Prices charged must be set high enough to recover all food costs. Nebraska's competitive food policy. This is food sold at schools during meal times, and the nonprofit school food service account does not receive the proceeds from these sales. These are considered in competition with the school meals program. This policy identifies when foods can be sold. Competitive food sales are prohibited from 1/2 hour before meal service until 1/2 hour after meal service. This applies to both breakfast and lunch. So let's say your school has a vending machine that's managed by the student council. It must be turned off during those times. Items sold as smart snacks are also considered to be non-program foods. The next 2 slides are pictures of handouts that are very useful when determining if an item meets smart snack guidelines. If your school does allow food and beverages to be sold during the day at times other than meal times, smart snack regulations specify what foods or beverages can be sold during the school day on the campus. Some definitions to help you understand: the school day is defined as midnight the night before until 30 minutes after the end of the school day. And the school campus is defined as all property under the jurisdiction of the school that are accessible to students during the school day. So if we go back to the student council vending machine, if they want to turn it on 1/2 hour after breakfast and lunch so they can sell during the day, the items in the machine must meet Smart Snack standards. So let's look at how to determine if the items are Smart Snack compliant. The Smart Snack decision chart has 2 pages, or a front and a back to it. The decision chart is shown here on the screen. It defines the standards for snacks as you see here, and beverages on the second side. You can see the snack must not exceed nutrient standards and additionally meet ingredient criteria. If you have a food item, look at the nutrition label and ingredient list on the item package, then use the chart to determine if it falls within the required limits. On the second page, the beverage guide goes into greater detail, listing beverages allowed at maximum sizes. This information is also presented by grade group. These handouts are guides to you to determine if an item meets Smart Snack standards and can be sold. In addition to the handouts, you can utilize the Smart Snack calculator on the Alliance for a Healthier Generation website. This calculator will ask you for some information on the product and then tell you if it meets the standards. By using these 2 tools, the handout, the chart, the decision chart, and this Smart Snack calculator, you can offer Smart Snack compliant items to be sold during the school day at your establishment. Moving on to procurement. So purchasing is simply the act of obtaining goods and services in exchange for money. Procurement is a multi-step approach to acquiring goods, supplies, and services at the best price. Your program receives federal and state dollars, so you are required to use free and open competition when making purchases. This means all vendors have the same opportunity to compete for your business. The Code of Conduct and Procurement Plan templates are included in your handout packet. Nutrition Services conducts procurement reviews. So in a review, we will ask to review your procurement plan, your code of ethics, and purchasing documentation you may have on hand, including invoices and receipts for purchases made from the nonprofit food service account. Moving on to Buy American provision. Buy American handout in your handout packet includes the Buy American provision and the Buy American justification form. The Buy American provision requires schools to purchase, to the maximum extent, domestic agricultural foods and products. This requirement is important because it supports the mission of the Child Nutrition Program, which is to serve children nutritious meals and support American agriculture. All food procurement transactions using funds from the nonprofit food service account must comply with the Buy American provision. You must keep documentation justifying the use of any exceptions due to price, availability, or domestic alternative substitutions. And new this year, you no longer need to complete the exception form for bananas, canned mandarin oranges, and pineapple. As we wrap up other topics, the last slide, we talk about USDA Foods Program. This is the program that includes your commodities, often referred to as brown box or sometimes F favors or DoD products. The information on this slide is also in your handout packet. This program is not administered by Nutrition Services, but is administered by Department of Health and Human Services. So on the slide and in your packet, we have contact information. There's a new director this year, Brian. Chad has now left the department. So the new director this year is listed on the screen, Brian, and he has an assistant, Matt. We have also listed the website to access the USDA foods, and that is listed on the screen. If you have questions or if you're new to the school meals program, we encourage you to reach out to those contacts to get signed up and get logins for your commodity information and ordering information. And up next, we are going to cover after school snack and special milk program. Also with these topics, we will give a brief overview, but there is additional training on our website, recorded training that goes into more detail about each of these programs. So the After School Care Snack Program is an additional program that might be offered at your school. Eligible programs must include educational or enrichment activities in a supervised, structured environment. Operators must complete production records to obtain accurate point of service meal counts to support the claim for reimbursement. Also required are 2 on-site reviews that must be conducted each school year within the first 4 weeks of the program start. Food safety must be practiced and potable water must be accessible by students. Since this program is often served by others, you need to make sure it is administered correctly and the staff is trained properly. In your handout packet, you have an after-school snack meal pattern chart, and then you also have an after-school snack production record. So you can follow along on the meal pattern chart. For the after-school snack program, you must serve at least 2 different meal components in the required portion sizes of the following 4 components. For milk, it must be served 8 fluid ounces, 1 cup. For meat alternate, the requirement is 1 ounce equivalent. For grain, 1 ounce equivalent. And for fruit and vegetable or 100% juice is 3/4 cup. Offer versus serve is not allowed for this program. Students must take both food components. You must retain production records showing food components, portion size, and the amount of food needed for the number of snacks planned that day. Additional record keeping resources, meal pattern charts, production records, and meal count forms can be found on our website under the After School Snack Program. Additionally, you will find the After School Snack production records. As I mentioned, you have a production record in your handout along with a completed production record to give you an example of what all needs to be listed on that information. The Special Milk Program provides reimbursement for milk served to children in schools, child care institutions, and eligible camps that do not participate in other U.S. Department of Ag child nutrition programs. Schools in the National School Lunch Program or School Breakfast Program may also participate in the Special Milk Program to provide milk to children in half-day, pre-kindergarten, or kindergarten programs where the children do not have access to the USDA School Meals Program. School Milk Program sponsors are reimbursed for the milk served to students in half-pint increments. There is no federal requirement to offer milk at no charge. Pricing is based on the options selected by the sponsor. There are 3 different pricing options including price with free milk option, pricing without free milk option, and non-pricing. School systems may apply to participate in the Special Milks Program if they have students in the school who, again, do not have access to the School Meals Program. For example, half-day kindergartners or preschoolers or students in school that cannot participate in breakfast or lunch. Only pasteurized fluid milks of fat-free and low-fat 1% milk can be served. These milks must meet all state and local standards.